I recently had a 3-zone system added to my house, powered by a 4-ton variable speed system. And when it comes to zoning, there's a lot of things that people get wrong about it, from the installation to the operations of it. And if not done right, it can lead to a disaster. In this video, I'm going to show you what I look for whenever I design for a high-end zoning system, along with what I like about the performance of it and not so much. Hi, this is Kenneth with Atlas AC, and at any point during this video, if you find it to be helpful, please like and subscribe. That would really help me out with the YouTube algorithms. Alright, we're going to start off with zoning design and what so many contractors get wrong with it. From there, we're going to cover what I do and don't like about the zoning system. And if you've been following some of my previous videos, I've been working on fixing my hot and cold spots. We're going to take a look at some of the end results of all the airflow tweaking I did, along with how the data compared in between zoned and non-zoned. For the B-roll, we are collapsing down 2 systems into one and installing a 3-zone dual fuel infinity system. We're doing it for a good customer of ours here in Texas. With that out of the way, let's jump into it. The Carrier Infinity is arguably the best system on the market for zoning. You can daisy chain 2 control boards together and get up to 8 zones. However, there are some limitations to it, and a lot of times you can only get away with 4 zones. That's because there's a problem that a lot of people get wrong whenever they install one of these zoning systems, and that is using the correct amount of airflow per zone. When one of the zones on a Carrier Infinity system starts to develop high static pressure, it has the ability to start opening up other zones to protect the equipment. Let me show you what I mean, and then I'll explain the bigger issue that this all leads to. I'll use my house as the sacrificial lamb so we can see a real life example. Here is the end results of my zoning system after all the tweaks and modifications. The design does look a little wonky, but we are very limited in options due to how tight my attic was. You can see that I have a total of 6 zoning dampers. Each damper is paired with another one. For example, these 2 here are going down into a chase feeding my downstairs. These 2 are feeding the upstairs common area and my son's room. And these are feeding the master bedroom and my daughter's room. And if we take a look at this chart, that came from my upstairs temperature and humidity data logger. The orange lines represent temperature and the green lines represent humidity. On this temperature spike right here, I had the system turned off because I was tinkering with it. And the attic ladder was down in the same room, so it's bringing up the temperature. I fired the system back up right here. I then went to the 9-inch duct above the stairwell, closed off the vent completely in order to artificially create high static pressure. And you can see how the system is kind of freaking out a little. The temperature lines are now harsh and erratic. The reason for this is the only ductwork that's left on the zone is a 7-inch, a 6, and a 4, which only gives us 205 CFM. And at the lowest speed, this system operates closer to 320 CFM. What's happening here is this zone is now creating a lot of static pressure. However, the Infinity system should be smart enough to open up some of the other zones in order to reduce this static pressure buildup. And if we take a look at the downstairs data logger, we can see that it is bleeding some to the downstairs, but not very much. So what's happening here is the upstairs zone is maintaining high static, and the Infinity system is only bleeding off the bare minimum. And the reason for this, the system is trying not to overcool any of the other zones. In order to maintain a high level of comfort in every single zone, it's going to end up pushing itself. And where most people get airflow design wrong is they will size each zone for cooling mode. However, heating mode has different requirements. The easiest way to explain this is to use a gas furnace for an example. The most common furnace used with an Infinity system is a 58TN series furnace. The AFUE is 80% efficiency, and for a 4 to 5 ton setup, we would use this 90,000 BTU furnace. And you can see here that it's saying that it's a 2-stage furnace, but right underneath it, it's saying variable speed. So which is it? What's going on here is that it is fully variable in cooling mode, but in heating mode, it has 2 stages that it operates in. And if we take a look at the minimum airflow requirements in heating mode, let's scroll down here. Right here, we can take a look at heating CFM, and you can see that it ranges from 1,445 CFM to 1,650 CFM. Basically, in first stage, we're going to be running roughly 3.5 tons of airflow. Now, what would happen if I designed out a zoning setup for cooling mode? The lowest operating capacity would be in between 20 to 25%. On a 4-ton system, that would be a little over 300 CFM or pretty close to 1 ton of airflow. If I have this one zone call in heating mode, it's going to try to push 1,400 CFM of heating. It will end up bleeding some of that airflow to the other zones. However, a lot of times not enough. That means a lot of this hot air stays in the cabinet and will trigger the limit switch and turn off the unit. Now, you don't have heating. There's two ways to solve this problem. The first way is to make sure each zone has roughly 3 to 3.5 tons of airflow, which ends up being a ridiculous amount of ductwork, or you can use a different furnace. This one is a high efficiency 97% furnace. However, the key thing that I'm looking at here is it's modulating. That means it can modulate the heat down to a lower speed. And if we take a look at the heating CFM requirements, you can see that this furnace can modulate as low as 535 CFM and up to 1285 CFM. What this is telling me is I can design the smallest zone down to around 500 CFM without triggering a high limit cutoff. For a 4-ton system, this ends up being around 30% of the operating capacity of the system. Even though the outdoor unit can operate lower than that, the furnace cannot. This is highly dependent on which furnace you use as well. If you end up using a higher output furnace, you might have to design for 35 to 40%. Man, I'm really good at this whole drawing thing. Next, the Mona Lisa. Nailed it. Now if we shift gears and look at heat pumps, we're really designing for auxiliary heat. Now when the outdoor unit is heating your house, it's not really that big of a deal because it can run at a very low speed. However, on really cold days, if the outdoor unit has to defrost and use all auxiliary heat, or if your outdoor unit isn't working correctly, and you have to lean on emergency heat until a technician can come out and fix the problem, that's really what we're designing for here. Here is an infinity air handler that we would use on a 4-ton heat pump. And when you spec the heat kit for this air handler, there's two specific ones that I look at. If we go over to the product data sheet and scroll down a ways, we come to the electric heaters that work with this unit. And if you look down here to the bottom, there's two specific ones, a 15 kW and a 20 kW. And what I like about these two, one, they have circuit breakers, and two, they can stage. For the 15 kW, you can see first stage is 5 kW, then it can ramp up to 10 kW, and then finally 15. And the 20 kW heater can go from 5 to 15 to 20. Now I can design a small zone for 5 kW heating capacity, which ends up being around 30% of the overall capacity of the system. And that would be for a 4 or 5 ton system, which are the ones that are primarily used for zoning. Because the smaller and smaller system that you have, the less likely you'll probably need to zone it. And for dual fuel applications, once again, we have to design for auxiliary heat, which puts us back at a modulating furnace. That being said, is an expensive zoning system like this one really worth it? The answer to that question is, it depends. For instance, if you have a single-story house and a portion of it's getting hotter or colder, and you're thinking about running a zone system to fix this problem, in other words, you're not really interested in controlling different rooms independently, but balance out hot and cold spots, I would not go down the zone route. I would focus on fixing my ductwork for better airflow. And the reason why actually has to do with comfort. On my house, whenever one zone is calling, I can actually notice when the AC is running. Let's say I have one zone designed for 30% of the capacity of the system, or 480 CFM. The system can only operate down to 20% of its operating capacity, or delivering 320 CFM. If that's the only zone that's calling, that zone is going to be delivering 66% of its overall capacity of the ductwork, and will cycle the air faster in that zone than versus non-zone. Because if it was non-zone, it would only be pushing 96 CFM, which would make it run longer. And if you're standing under a vent, you would never know that it was running. Versus zone, you would be able to feel the air coming out of the vents. Now, the larger the zone it is, the less you'll notice this, along with multiple zones calling at the same time. Or if you have high ceilings or vaulted ceilings, you probably wouldn't notice it either. That being said, that's just me nitpicking a little bit, because I'm in the HVAC industry thinking about air conditioning all day long, and I want to go home and just not think about it. My master's not all that big of a room with only one supply vent, so it's pretty easy to notice. That being said, there are a lot of things that I really like about the zoning system. The first one, which is the one that I like the most, is how it handles the shoulder season. This is the time frame when it's really nice outside and your AC or heater really doesn't run very much. And it ends up making my house feel stagnant or dungy. And when I'm running the system when it's non-zoned, the thermostat is downstairs with the smallest heat load, so it ends up not running very often. And the upstairs will get a bit warmer or colder, ending up being a delta there. When I have the system zoned, the upstairs ends up running more often, which eliminates a lot of this problem, helping to keep it from feeling stale. Because of this, you also end up with better filtration throughout the entire year. And the next thing that I really like about it is before I replaced the ductwork and added the zone system, whenever a cold snap happened, the upstairs would get quite a bit warmer than the downstairs. And whenever I was getting ready in the morning and walked downstairs, I could feel that temperature difference and knew whether or not to grab a jacket for the day. However, in February, whenever we replaced the ductwork and added the zoning system, After firing up the zone system, I got ready like normal in the morning the next day. As I was leaving for the day and opened up the door, I got slapped in the face because apparently a cold front came through that night, and I had no clue. After that, I had to change my routine and take a look at the outdoor temperature from the thermostat before leaving. Now I have no clue if it's freezing outside or 105 degrees outside, because the inside is always perfect. Now, the most popular reason why most folks like these systems is for nighttime use. Let's say that you like it at 68 degrees in your bedroom, but that freezes out the kiddos or guests that come over. This system can fix that problem. You can run up to 4 different zones, all set to different temperatures, giving you a lot of flexibility and control throughout your house. And the thing that I really like about it, as long as you have a return air in each room, it creates its own independent environment, almost as if you have your own little AC and heating system for that space. And the next thing many folks like about it is energy savings. Because if you have unoccupied spaces for long periods of time, why spend the money to condition that space at the same rate as the rest of the house? You can simply throttle back the system in those areas until those spaces are needed. Overall, with this system, you end up with a high degree of temperature control in multiple spaces throughout your house. And since the system can ramp down to 20%, you get the highest level of comfort that a ducted zoning system can provide, along with additional energy savings because you no longer have to overheat or overcool spaces that don't need it. Now, if you ask me the question, would I buy this zoning system for my house? The answer is no, for one reason. I don't know if you know this, but kids are expensive. And for whatever reason, you never have enough money. That being said, if money wasn't the issue, I would definitely put one on my house. Both non-zone and zone have their pros and cons. For my house and the way I run the system, there ends up being more pros than cons. If you end up putting one of these systems on your house, I do have a couple recommendations. Keep in mind that this is only one system. Because of that, I would not have one zone set up for cooling mode and another zone set for heating. The system can only perform one task at a time, and this can end up freaking it out. I also wouldn't schedule drastic temperature swings throughout the day. I would try to limit it to around 5 degrees. For the most part, that's going to wrap up the Infinity zoning review. Now let's take a look at fixing some of my hot and cold spots, along with looking at some of the data in between zoned and non-zoned. In my daughter's room, as you can see here, the orange line that is representing the temperature in that room, you can see it touching on 80 degrees. We then replaced the HVAC system with a fully variable speed system without modifying any of the ductwork just to see how much it can improve. And it did make some pretty good improvements, but it only got us about halfway there. Here's after we made the ductwork modifications, and it was made clear to me that we probably did not fix the problem. And sure enough, that was indeed the case. What I ended up doing is rerouting that duct altogether from the distro box and connecting it directly to the supply trunk. That way I could fully utilize that duct and get the max amount of CFM out of it. And that did the trick. And in my son's room, after doing the duct modifications, it created a problem. You can see here on this day, I had temperature set at 72 degrees, and in his room, it's getting pretty close to 76 degrees. What I ended up doing is dampering down the 9-inch over the stairwell, which is tied to the same distro box, and that directed more airflow to his room, fixing that problem. And I simply just dampened it down about 50% at the vent. And now with these modifications made, you can see in every single room, both zoned and non-zoned, is pretty well balanced. That being said, the zone readings are coming back slightly better in almost every single space that I'm measuring, which makes sense because I have 3 thermostats that can just hit the nail on the head. I do want to point out my son's room, which is still a little off. In this example, I am running the zone system, and you can see that the upstairs zone is set at 70 degrees. However, in my son's room, it's still touching on 74 degrees, which isn't the end of the world and is well within HVAC standards. And that's one of the issues whenever you do duct modifications. Realistically, to get close to identical temperatures in every single room, you would need to run a heat load per room, do a manual de-takeoff, and replace all your ductwork. And that costs a lot of money. And lastly, to say that my house is balanced out for non-zoning is kind of disingenuous. You see, it is technically balanced out in cooling mode, but not in heating mode at all. And it's going to end up overheating the upstairs when winter rolls around. If my house was balanced out correctly for non-zoning, it would look something like the upstairs would run 3 to 4 degrees warmer in the summertime, so it would be slightly undercooling, and the downstairs would be 3 to 4 degrees cooler in the wintertime, because the upstairs is now going to be slightly overheating. So basically, the upstairs is going to be 3 to 4 degrees warmer year-round. In an overly simplified explanation of the reason why, is heat rises, so some of the downstairs heat is going to find its way upstairs, and some of the cooler air is going to fall downstairs. And the whole reason zoning was originally created was to fix this problem. That way, if you have the downstairs thermostat set at 72, along with the upstairs set at 72, now both the upstairs and downstairs is balanced out. If you're located in Texas and you're interested in one of these systems, let us know. Until next time, have a good one.